welcome to the J. Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. J. Ligato, and today we're going to be providing commentary on this Twitter long post from Alexander Dugan. And really, he's been extremely prophetic in terms of his understanding of the future and what's going to be happening. And his views are typically in alignment with my own views. And so I'm going to go over just what I've said in prior videos and how it aligns with what this Twitter post is saying, and how I do think that we're both right, and I'll give my reasons for why we are right. And so Alexander Dugan starts off this post about the 5 fronts against unipolar globalism, which is the current Western world. And so we see here it says, on the eve of 2024, it is worth taking a look at the overall picture of the world and the main geopolitical trends. Overall, we are in a moment of transition from unipolarity to multipolarity. And I don't think that's even really in debate at this point. It's just about when is that turning point actually going to occur that the unipolar world order and the unipolar moment is over, because I think the United States is in terminal decline and is trying to stave that off for as long as possible, but I don't think it really has a method of doing so. And so it's going to happen that the United States just simply loses. What does that look like for the United States to lose? What does that mean for the new world order? What's going to occur at that point? We don't know for sure, but it does look like it's going to be centered around the BRICS formation. So the article goes on to say, this year, multipolarity received additional structuring in BRICS 10. Argentina, having just joined this organization, was hastily removed from there by another globalist clown, Javier Milei. And Javier has shown himself to be an ardent Zionist. And so you can really think of it as there are 2 forces in the world right now. The Western forces, the unipolar forces, which are controlled by the Zionists, and the anti-Zionist coalition, which is the multipolar world. And so Javier has shown himself to be one of those people who, if I remember correctly, the price of beef has doubled in Argentina within the first few days of his election, because he just has terrible policies that he's has a hostile relationship with the major trade partners of Argentina. And Argentina is already in a bad enough situation that it doesn't need to have hostilities with the only people willing to trade with it. So just really disappointing to see Argentina decline even faster. They wanted to try something new, and really all they were doing was further entrenching themselves in the exploitative neo-colonialist system of the Western world that is, as I like to talk about, Zionist controlled. So the article says, the recent triumphant visit of Vladimir Putin to the UAE and Saudi Arabia, followed by lengthy negotiations with Iranian President Raisi, I can't remember how it's pronounced, Raisi, demonstrates how seriously Russia takes multipolarity, especially on the eve of 2024, when Russia enters its annual presidency of BRICS. Okay, a few interesting points here. One is, whenever Russia goes to these other countries like UAE and Saudi Arabia, the Russian leaders are treated like rock stars because they really provided a bloody nose to the Western world. And these countries, even if they're still to a certain extent subservient to the United States, they wish they could do the same as what Russia's doing. And so they're given the entire red carpet treatment. They're treated like honorary brothers to these various countries. It's really funny to see compared to how the United States is treated by these countries. So Russia, Vladimir Putin, was treated very good by the UAE and Saudi Arabia. And it's worth mentioning how important 2024 is. This video might actually be posted in 2024, even though I'm making it in 2023, but it's really important to recognize how important 2024 is for the future, because Russia is going to be the president of BRICS, and the United States is going to have a presidential election between 2 people who I think are complete failures in terms of their presidencies. They both had a presidency, Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and both of them absolutely catastrophically failed as presidents, and those are your choices again. And so this is going to be such an interesting moment. I think it might be the pivotal year where people say, when is a unipolar moment over? I think people are going to say 2024, because I also think that's going to be when the collapse of Ukraine occurs. The people are not providing the funding, the Western nations are not providing the funding in order to prop up the Ukrainian government. It looks like the military and political establishments of Ukraine are at each other's throat. So there's just a number of things occurring. Russian presidency of BRICS, United States presidential elections, the collapse of Ukraine, the Israeli situation, you have the Venezuelan situation. I mean, just so much is happening in 2024 that it's nuts to think about. So the article goes on to say, by the end of the year, 2023, this time in Latin America, a new syndrome of multipolarity emerged. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro declared his country's claims to the territory of British Guyana. Maxim Medvedeva, in his Telegram channel, notes of a traditionalist, rightly points out that Guyana itself was a product of the evil genius of Atlanticism. Lord Palmerston, who planned and implemented the dissection of Great Colombia into pieces with the death of Bolivar, including the snipping off of Essequibo to British Guyana. British Guyana, Essequibo, along with the Malvinas, is another front of multipolarity against unipolarity. Okay, so I knew nothing about Guyana, and I am not ashamed to admit that, before this conflict. So I started to study it. What happened? Well, it turns out that there was a rigged judicial decision in favor of Guyana over Venezuela in terms of who got Essequibo. And it turns out that some of the judges, like when they were retiring or right before they died, or like they left memoirs or something like that, but they admitted like it was a rigged decision, that their judicial decision about who gets Essequibo was rigged by the United Kingdom and by the United States. And so Venezuela was like, well, wait a minute, we trusted this judicial decision, but it was just another colonialist decision to destroy our nations. And so Venezuela is pissed because the international legal system that was supposed to be impartial was not actually impartial, and they want that territory back. I think that makes sense to me. If the judges themselves were admitting that they made the wrong decision because they were like influenced by these countries, then that sounds like a legitimate reason for getting this territory back. But anyways, the article goes on to say, overall, we are already dealing with 5 potential actual fronts. So Alexander Dugin goes on to talk about what are these fronts of the unipolar versus multipolar world orders for Zionist versus anti-Zionist. And so it starts off with Russia's fighting with the collective West and American Anglo-Saxon globalism in Ukraine. Essentially, this is a civil war of Russians, imperial Russians against Atlanticist Russians who have betrayed their Russian identity. Atlanticist Russians are used by the unipolar forces of the West, and they are willing to use really anyone they can get their hands on to fight against their enemies, because for them, it's all about pitting people against other people in order to exploit the populace and extract their resources. And so for them, they just don't care, particularly because their religious beliefs show that they think of Gentiles as not having souls, and they view them as just cattle that are there for the service of the Zionist rulers. And so they don't care that these people, Atlanticist Russians, are fighting the imperialistic Russians. They don't care whatsoever about all the deaths that is going to cause. So the second front is the Islamic world, which is consolidating with serious delay, because they should have consolidated a long time ago, but sectarian tensions that the United States propagated and the United Kingdom propagated stopped them from coalescing into a civilization state. But they're coalescing against Israel, which is the controller of the West right now. They're the Zionists in charge of the entire West. And Israel is conducting a systematic genocide of the Arab population. And the reason for this is, I think, pretty simple, which is that they're recognizing that their Zionist-controlled governments are on the decline, on terminal decline. And so they want to get as much territory as possible, and they want to ethnically cleanse and genocide as much of their opposition as possible, while they still have as much power as possible on their side, because they recognize that there's no off-ramp where the unipolar moment continues in perpetuity. It's on a timeline that is likely within the span of the next decade. And so they're going all out in order to wipe out their enemies, because they don't know if they're going to have a better chance. So the article goes on to say, here on the side of Israel as its Middle Eastern proxy, again, is the unipolar West. Again, I disagree with a lot of people who say that Israel is a proxy of the United States, because when you look at where the money comes from, it is very clearly Zionist billionaires who are in charge of the West. And it's Zionist billionaires who are in charge of Israel too. So that's their country. They have the right of return. If they ever get into trouble within Western nations, they flee to Israel. That's what's been happening since the creation of Israel. Okay, so the third front is the bloc of anti-colonial countries in West Africa, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Central African Republic, Gabon, which is united against pro-colonial Atlanticist regimes and globalist France under Macron. Here too, an open conflict could flare up at any moment. Right, I've talked about that as well. This is another front that's opening. The fourth front is the potential front of Taiwan against China, concerns the United States perhaps the most, and here a direct conflict awaits its hour. The United States wants that conflict and it needs that conflict as soon as possible, but it doesn't think it can win that conflict based off of military exercises, simulations that it's run. So it doesn't really know what to do at this point because, again, as I've said, there's no off-ramp for this terminal decline. And the final one, which we already talked about, which is the declaration of Venezuela's rights to Essequibo, an artificial colonial creation of the Atlanticists. Same goes for the Malvinas issue, which could become acute after the removal of the degenerate who came to power. This is what happens when revolutionary Peronism is crossed with liberalism, as done by the loser Sergio Massa. So I don't know what Alexander Dugan has against Sergio Massa. I don't know that name off the top of my head, but he very clearly hates them. So yeah, I talked about this before it happened, which was you're going to see in Latin America something heat up. Unipolar versus multipolar, and boom, we have that exact same thing happening. So this goes on to say India holds a special place in the multipolar heptarchy. It is a fully independent state civilization which is strategically closest to the US due to conflict with China and Pakistan, as well as more broadly the Islamic factor. At the same time, India is friendly with Russia, Africa, and Latin America. There are no direct conflict zones with globalists except for the memory of the monstrous era of British colonization. The West has previously supported radical Islam in Pakistan. This is partly persistent, but is no longer so vivid. India is needed by the globalists to counter China. So India is that wild card civilization state for me where I just don't know what direction is actually going to head in the long term. I think its long-term benefit is to get rid of the unipolar moment because then it has a chance to compete with other countries to be as strong as possible, whereas the United States would never allow a competitor nation. But I don't think that they're going to do that because I think they have an inferiority complex due to how massively China has risen compared to India, where historically India and China have gone back and forth about who's the more powerful nation, who's really the most powerful nation in the world. And India just has this inferiority complex now because China has been so successful that it really, above all else, even above its own benefit, it doesn't want to allow China to be successful because it sees itself as inferior to China, and it sees itself inferior to China to more of an extent than it does the United States, because the United States is willing to offer things like people of Indian descent being in charge of major tech companies. And so India still sees itself as an important lapdog of the Western hegemonic moment if it chooses the West side. And so I don't think that's in India's best interest to choose the West side, but that does seem to be the direction it's currently heading. So this goes on to say the Atlanticists and supporters of a unipolar world understand this perfectly well. Thus, as early as April 2022, Liz Truss, while holding the post of Foreign Secretary of Great Britain, talked about the return of geopolitics. More recently, Truss, as the former Prime Minister of England, on her tour of the U.S., sought to persuade the Republicans to support an Atlanticist approach by funding Kyiv's ongoing conflict against Russia. In this context, she emphasized that the conflict in Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, though seemingly separate, are in fact facets of the same overarching war. I've been saying this as well, which is that we are seeing, and this is how I like to phrase it, the opening salvos of World War III. These are the theaters of war for the upcoming conflict. And when you look at the history books, like this was the year 2050, and you opened up a history book, you would see these are the opening salvos of World War III. That's what all these conflicts are about. There's this overarching narrative that is threaded throughout all these conflicts, which is unipolarity versus multipolarity, Zionist versus anti-Zionist. So this goes on to say, this is the correct geopolitical view of things. The tension in West Africa and Essequibo are also fronts of the same war. The global geopolitical landscape is currently divided into a heptarchy consisting of 7 major entities: the West, Russia, China, India, the Islamic world, Africa, and Latin America. And again, the West, aside from potentially having India on its side, is alone when it comes to those major entities. The others are all in a coalition against the West. This division is primarily along a singular fault line with the West on one side and the other 6 on the other side. The globalists themselves clearly and distinctly understand this in their eyes. There's only one pole, the West itself. The rest should be its vassals, not sovereign poles, and fight each other, not the West. Right. So the West can exploit the populace and extract their resources. So this goes on to say the structure of the global confrontation, the 6 against 1, is also clearly understood in Russia. In his article, 2024, the year of geopolitical awakening, in the magazine Scout, the head of Russia's SVR, Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, Sergei Narishkin, says the coming year on this world stage will pass under the sign of further intensification of the confrontation between the two above-mentioned geopolitical principles, Anglo-Saxon or the insular divide and rule, and directly antagonistic to it, continental unite and lead. Manifestations of this fierce opposition in the coming year will be observed in all, even the most remote regions of the world, from the most significant for us post-Soviet space to South America and the Pacific Ocean, which we are absolutely seeing. So he goes on to say, so we are united to lead, including uniting and leading the Eurasian territories, especially the traitorous Ukraine, and the enemy will continue to try and divide and rule, trying to sow discord between the poles of the heptarchy, the 6 emerging worlds, Russian, Chinese, Islamic, Indian, African, and Latin American. The enemies want there to be only one world, their own. The existence of other worlds different from the Western one, they reject and demonize, especially the Russian one. We must clearly understand this and realize that the 5 fronts of the struggle against the unipolar world order and the Western hegemony are all fronts of our war. And this is a post by Alexander Dugan. Man, this is so accurate for what I believe and what I've been saying for over a decade now. So I'm excited to see other people really picking up this mindset. And I'm excited to see what I consider to be the good guys winning this conflict. So if you found this video to be informative, helpful, interesting, please give us a like. It helps us in the algorithm. Please subscribe to our channel on YouTube and Rumble. Leave us a comment in the comment box below. Questions, concerns, critiques. I do read all of them, and I do respond when it seems necessary. And tell a friend about our channel. We are being suppressed in the algorithm, and we want to get out the word. I've made over 300 videos over the less than the last year. So I've been really productive, nearly a video a day, and I do want people to actually see them. So word of mouth does help us. We have some other marketing that we're going to do as well, but we do appreciate if you can tell other people about us. So thanks for watching this, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.